Hey guys, how's it going? It's Russell Matthews here again, and today we're going to touch on a topic that's been a little bit of a red button issue here in Canada, and that's UBI, otherwise known as Universal Basic Income. Global News, one of the larger broadcasters in Canada, just put out a video on their YouTube channel all about Universal Basic Income, so I thought we'd take a look at it today. UBI has been on my mind now for a while, ever since the provincial government in Ontario started some pilot projects to see how it would work. Unfortunately, when the government's changed over, they kind of cut those programs. I was pretty frustrated that they cut the programs because I thought, even though the jury's still out on whether or not it's a good idea, we have to at least invest in testing this stuff out. So I was like, come on, guys, just let it play out. But luckily for us, well, maybe not luckily because it's because of a global pandemic, we've got a huge trial going on, and that's the CERB. If you don't know what it is, that's the Canadian Emergency Response Benefit. And it kind of worked a little bit like a universal basic income for only a few months. And since the government rolled out CERB, everyone's been thinking, hey, this might work as a long-term thing. For people in Canada who were out of work, they were able to apply for up to $2,000 every single month to replace that income. Now that regular payment from the government is a little bit like universal basic income, so now that CERB has stopped, it seems that people are getting more and more interested in universal basic income, and it seems like it might be a pretty big talking point to the next Canadian election. So when this global video popped up on my feed here on YouTube, I thought, hey, let's take a second and take a look at it, react to it, see what we think. Some people oversimplify it as free money, and it's not exactly that. But you know what is free? Absolutely smashing the like button, huh? But seriously, if you could hit that like button, it helps me out so much. It's crazy how much just clicking that will show more people the video. So let's cozy up. I've got my coffee here, gonna have a sip. Oh, that's so good. Let's take a look.
The idea of providing people with a basic income is now back in vogue, as countries struggle with high unemployment rates and a global recession in the wake of COVID-19. It's a pretty simple concept. The government provides just enough cash to people so that their basic needs can be met, regardless of work status. And despite being viewed by critics as a too costly utopian pipe dream, basic income is now being looked at as a way to address the social inequities and welfare gaps that the pandemic exposed.
I think that's pretty crazy, actually. That's actually really true. Before all of this COVID stuff, there weren't a lot of people talking about UBI, and now it's really like there's a spotlight on it. I never thought when this was trashed at the provincial level that only a few years later we'd see them talking about it actually happening in Ottawa on a national level.
We have a choice to make.
Hey, there he is, Trudy boy.
To move forward.
Love him or hate him, you've got to admit, amongst the other world leaders, he's got to be one of the most attractive dudes.
A choice to make. We can decide to move forward instead of returning to the status quo. We can choose to embrace bold new solutions to the challenges we face and refuse to be held back by old ways of thinking.
Crises, for better or for worse, often provide governments with the opportunity to make big, sweeping changes.
That's a good point. That's really true. I think that could actually speak to the reason that so many people are more and more resistant to some of the government regulations that have been put in. There are definitely some people who overreact to some pretty basic guidelines, but all in all, it's not a bad idea to keep our government in check and to always be thinking about what they could potentially pull in a time that we're not really paying attention. Now, I'm not saying they will, but why not keep our eyes open for it?
And when it comes to universal basic income, we are not without a roadmap. In 1974, a small town in rural Manitoba became the site for a landmark basic income experiment. Dauphin is a farming town of around...
Okay, so I was wrong. It didn't just start in Ontario with these pilot projects. I guess there's some more stuff. Ooh, I'm learning.
Around 10,000 people, with a large, tight-knit Ukrainian community. Its size and demographic made it the perfect place for researchers to launch Canada's first basic income program, which they called MINCOM. It was designed by a group of economists who wanted to find out if people stopped working when you gave them a basic income. The project used a popular form of basic income called a negative income tax model. Anyone in the town could enroll, but only if they made under a certain amount. For example, in order for a family of 4 to be eligible, they had to earn less than $13,000 a year in...
Okay, so that to me says that it's not exactly universal basic income. Maybe this is just an earlier form of it that's just a basic income, because I'm pretty sure that universal means that it would be to absolutely everybody, regardless of how much money you make.
Eligible families were able to receive an annual income of $3,800, which is around $19,800 today. Any additional income earned was deducted from the payments at a rate of 50%. Meaning every dollar of earnings reduced the payment by 50 cents. The experiment ran for 4 years, but by the time it had come to an end in 1979, the study had run into financial troubles and didn't have the support of the new Conservative government.
Hey, that sounds a lot like the situation in Ontario. That seems to be the main kicker for this whole UBI concept is people are really worried about, like, do we have the money for it? And like, I have some of those concerns too. As of right now, I'm kind of leaning on the side that it would be a good idea, but I don't really know that I have the faith in the government to properly dole it out efficiently. When I was a teenager, I worked in a job that was technically under the government, so we were funded fully by the government. Everybody I worked with there knew that if we didn't spend the money that we had, next year we wouldn't get it in our budget. So come the end of the month, we'd be spending tons and tons and tons of money just to show that we were going to need that money next year. That experience really got me thinking about how well or not well a government can actually dole out these sort of policies. And that's absolutely crazy to me, spending every single dollar that you possibly can just to make sure that you can get it next year. If it were a private company, like a business, you'd be absolutely crazy to have that mindset, right? You're always going to be looking for some sort of way to cut those expenses out. And if you're an employee and you do that, you're probably going to be rewarded. Whereas if you're working in the government, they'll probably give you a slap on the wrist saying, hey, we need that money. What if we need it tomorrow, right? It makes me worry sometimes, I'll be honest.
The data was just gathering dust in the National Archives until economist Evelyn Forget dug it up in 2008.
And I sort of walked into the regional office on Inkster Boulevard and saw 1,800 boxes full of data that was collected during this experiment.
Oh man, I didn't even realize that too. Like when they were doing this experiment, there weren't the computers that we have today to manage the data. They're probably going to have to comb through like boxes and boxes and boxes of like paper recorded data. Man, what a world we live in that we don't have to do that stuff anymore.
Evelyn wanted to find out if providing people with a basic income would improve their health outcomes.
In many cases, we're using the healthcare system, and in particular our hospitals, to treat the consequences of poverty.
It's cool they're talking about the health consequences. I normally think about the finance side of things.
They can live adequate lives. Would you eliminate some of this illness that you're treating in the hospital before it ever occurs?
After several grueling years of combing through the data, she published the results in 2011. Evelyn found that there was an 8.5% reduction in the hospitalization rate for people receiving MINCOME payments, largely due to fewer people going to the hospital because of accidents and injuries and mental health issues.
We spend over $70 billion.
So that could actually end up saving money. Like if they have to spend less money in the health sector, which is also government funded in Canada, then maybe they could be onto something on this health side. I wonder if there's other sort of industries that could be affected in the same sort of way.
We spend over $70 billion a year on hospitals right now across Canada. So an 8.5% reduction in hospitalization is pretty dramatic.
The study also found that during the experiment, more teenagers graduated high school. And as for the question of whether people stopped working,
we've never found any evidence that giving people a basic income discourages work.
The only people that worked less.
Yeah, that's another sort of rebuttal that people will have if they're super against UBI, right? They're going to say if you give money to people, they're not going to have any drive to work. They're not going to have any motivation to do anything productive for society. Now, I absolutely do not believe that for a second. From my own experience and the people that I've met, I think if you gave people this sort of safety net, that there'd be a lot of people who would be doing things that they're more passionate about. Think of all the people who would, in an ideal world, want to start a business and contribute economically to society, but instead, because they have a family, they have 5 kids at home, some people, right? They've got to go to work every single day. Who has the time to take the financial risk to start a business? right? How many huge business tycoons are just trapped in this sort of cycle of needing to go to work and not being able to start something that really could be successful?
The only people that worked less after receiving payments were new mothers looking to extend the abysmal maternity leave of the 70s and young unattached men. Something Evelyn says is likely due to the fact that the payments allowed teenagers to stay in school instead of dropping out in order to work.
Everybody seems to invest in education. In the case of Dauphin,
Yeah, my first thought is like, when all these people, if they're given however much money a month, like would they just go and like play Call of Duty all day? But I don't buy it. Yeah, I think it's probably that they're actually staying in school longer, getting a better education.
in the case of Dauphin, we were investing in high school education. In Ontario, people were focusing on community colleges.
4 decades later, the results from Ontario's short-lived basic income program are strikingly
This is the one I
similar
was
to
talking
Dauphin's.
about.
Hospitalizations and doctor visits declined, and participants' physical and mental health improved dramatically. People didn't stop working and instead reported moving from low-paying dead-end jobs to jobs with better working conditions and opportunities. Overall, the study, published earlier this year, found that receiving a basic income improved people's quality of life in pretty much every way. So why don't we have a national basic income program in Canada?
Yeah, I mean, that's so huge. If you've ever talked to me, you know that I think that spending time with family, spending time with friends, that's more important than your work and your career in my eyes, right? Think of the person who just took on their third job driving for Uber or something like that, like a gig worker, right? They're trading their time for money constantly. And really, when it comes to happiness in life, I think that time would be better spent forming solid relationships with the people you love. If that person doesn't have to go and drive for Uber all night, who knows? Maybe they're going to spend more time at home raising their kids, and that could lead to more successful people in the future, like who are raised by these people who have more time to raise them, if that makes sense.
Why don't we have a national basic income program in Canada? In short, because it's expensive. Critics of basic income say Canada can't afford it, and often claim that people will stop working, which various studies have now debunked. In fact, Canada already has basic income-like programs in place. Seniors in Canada receive a form of basic income, and as a result, Canada has one of the lowest rates of poverty among seniors in the world.
Now, as an aside, I think this is something that needs to be talked about more. It probably is the topic for a future video. We have so many people reaching that senior age right now, and I think it's like this asteroid that's coming towards Earth, and nobody's prepared for it. We don't have the infrastructure to take care of that, but that's another topic for another day. Man.
Has one of the lowest rates of poverty among seniors in the world. Similarly, parents with kids under 18 can also receive a basic income through the Canada Child Benefit. In 2018, the Parliamentary Budget Office found that a national basic income for low-income Canadians would cost the government an additional $43 billion a year on top of existing federal support. But
Okay, that's another point that detractors bring up. Now, I don't know if this is true or not. I haven't really taken a look too deeply at the numbers, but I often hear people saying that if we were to put in some sort of universal basic income, we'd have to cut a bunch of other social services that we would otherwise not have to pay for with Canada's current system. Where are we going to get the money to do this? Like, are we going to have to take away from other community programs and community services that people tend to rely on? I don't know. I don't have the answers. Nobody does, but it's interesting to think about.
the government an additional $43 billion a year on top of existing federal support. But poverty comes with its own costs too.
There are two ways to look at the cost of the basic income. You can look at the upfront costs of getting money into people's hands so that they can spend it and meet their needs, or you can look at the return on investment. The return on investment are things like the downstream savings you're going to find in your healthcare system because you're not spending a lot of money to treat the consequences of poverty.
Yeah, that's pretty big. The tricky thing is that we don't really know in hard numbers what those sort of benefits could be. So it's scary to just kind of like jump off the deep end and just trust that there's going to be all these benefits. I hope, you know? Even if it's really likely that there will be these benefits, it's still scary to take that step without having that evidence right in front of you 100%.
The reductions in the cost of the justice system, right? Because you're not jailing so many people, you're not criminalizing poor
Right.
people. You're not spending money on child and family services because kids end up in foster care.
Here's all these
on
ripple
account of,
effects.
the poverty that they're living in. So there are a lot of returns, a lot of social returns, but there is an upfront cost that we do have to pay for.
With the rise of automation and the number of people working precarious jobs steadily increasing, basic income is pitched as a kind of disaster insurance that can protect people in a crisis situation from going without necessities such as food or housing.
The one thing about a basic income is that it addresses everybody. Everybody sits within that system. And it acts
If it's
almost
universal.
as an automatic stabilizer. So if something like COVID-19 comes along, it automatically expands to meet the needs of people within the system.
Oh,
And when the economy recovers, it contracts.
we're saying
We
it can
don't
be
need any
flexible,
more
the
people to go
amount
back to
that
work,
we need.
and therefore
Huh.
they stop collecting.
I never
We
thought
are
of that.
currently experiencing the worst economic downturn since the Great Depression. Maybe a big idea from a
The
small
Eaton Center.
town could help
Man.
us out of it, and better prepare us for the next global crisis.
What year is this? I guess that's it for the video. It actually does a pretty good job of explaining what UBI is. It's going to be really interesting seeing how much different parties are going to talk about universal basic income. Like right now, the Liberals have come out and said that they think it could be a good idea. I definitely suspect that the Conservative Party would be against this 100%. That's sort of the MO, to be financially conservative. But if this garners more and more support and more interest, politicians are going to be forced to talk about it and kind of debate its merits, which all around I think could be a very good thing. It'll give us a reason to really iron out these problems with it, because of course the people against it are going to bring them all up, right? And if we're going to convince them otherwise, there needs to be some sort of hard data. So maybe there'll be more studies. But I'll tell you guys, I'm really not sold either way. I definitely think it could be a good idea, and if you had asked me a few years ago, I would be 100% game for it. But I've started thinking about some of the negatives that could be in it, and I'm not so sure. So let me know in the comments down below what you think of it, and I'd love to see what you think, right? Because my mind's not made up. If people are open to learning and talking about this sort of stuff, I think it can only help the situation. But as always, remember to like this video, subscribe if you really liked it, and feel free to share it with a friend if you think they'd dig it too. I'm really looking forward to seeing what you guys have to say down there. There's a lot of opposing opinions on this, so let's see. But with that said, thanks so much for watching, you guys, and I'll see you next time.